So I'm here and I'm excited to talk to you today. My day job, I work up in Heber City and Park City, not too far away from here. And it seems a little hot. I'm going to move it down just a hair. Okay. And I work for Dominion Energy. But today I serve on the board for the Utah Pipeline Association. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the pipelines in and around our state. Okay. Currently, UPA is made up of 24 member companies, as you can see some of their logos up here. And I'm going to show you a map really quick. There's not going to be a test or anything. Hopefully you can see blue and red lines. If you're colorblind, I don't know what you see. Okay. But this is a map of transmission lines. So the analogous to this, it's not a distribution line. A distribution line would be like a gas line that feeds this building. It would run in tens of pounds. Okay. The analogous to these transmission lines are like the high voltage transmission lines that run from a power plant and ship the energy long distance. So these pipelines do the same thing. One of the operators we were talking with last week down in Moab shared that they run all the way up to the Canadian border. I know some of that run through this valley serve Southern California. So the main goal of these lines, they run at much higher pressures, hundreds of pounds, if not over 1,000 pounds in pressure. And they range in size from anywhere down as small as maybe a 3-inch line up to, I think the largest in the state's a 42-inch line. Okay. And so I want to kind of go and talk about how to identify these, because no, they're not as frequent as maybe a distribution line, but the impact of hitting one of these could be detrimental. So here's my first example for you. Okay, it's a textbook example of what a pipeline right-of-way might look like. If you look in the top center there's going to be low vegetation in the center, and if you look on either side, there's some higher vegetation on either side. Okay, and if you look up there, you see a pipe. Now that pipe doesn't have to necessarily be in the middle of that right-of-way. Okay, and I worked in an engineering group, and Dominion Energy installed its first pipe in Utah back in 1929. So we're coming up on the 100-year anniversary within the decade of that. And you can imagine over time, and some of that's still in service, okay? If you take care of the pipe, then it'll last a good long time. But you imagine what the state looked like over 100 years ago, okay? It looks very different today. As the state grew up, in this bottom left-hand corner, you might see that over time, someone might come in and cultivate parts of that, okay? And you can see some dotted examples of maybe some pipeline markers. But just what keeps us all employed is the growth. And eventually, this is becoming more commonplace, where we are now in the backyards of many subdivisions. And so we try to work closely with the homeowners who move in, not to install sheds over it. And some of our standard pipeline markers might look a little different. Some will put them down on curbs because, as you can imagine, putting a vertical marker in someone's yard, the homeowner will want to pull that out. So here's some examples, okay? I asked some of their operators, said, hey, we're going to give a presentation, educate some contractors, and they sent some examples in. So this example I think is pretty good of that kind of first textbook example. You can see the right-of-way that runs along the ridge line. For those of you, you might be able to see a little post sticking up in the middle of this. It says 248. For a pipeline operator, this acts a lot like a mile marker, okay, just like we're familiar with on our highways, okay? Because some of these sections, just like this, might be patrolled by the pipeline operator, by a drone, by a helicopter, by an aircraft of some sort, and they're looking for signs of erosion or someone digging across us, any sign that potentially the integrity of that line might be compromised for one reason or another, okay? Another great example is here, where you can see some pipeline markers sticking up, maybe multiple in the area. Some sections and some operators choose UTVs or ATVs. Sometimes they do surveys by foot to check our cathodic protection system and to take reads. But more and more commonplace, our right-of-ways are starting to look like this. And imagine if you were working, maybe replacing, let's say, a storm drain in this parking lot. You might not be aware, if you don't have an active blue state ticket, where necessarily that pipeline right-of-way runs. I can't tell when it hits that parking lot where it runs. And that's why we love partnering with blue stakes. because our biggest threat to any pipeline is third-party damage. For instance, my company, we have on our distribution system over 1,000 line strikes a year on it. If I look at how many leaks are created from corrosion or a faulty fitting, those numbers are extremely low in comparison. And that's why we like to partner with them, because we serve the same communities, you know, we should have the same customers. And we all want to play in the same sandbox well together. And with home prices going up, a lot of areas are starting to look like this, where we're getting a lot more multifamily dwellings. And you can see maybe up in the top middle here, there's a small pipeline marker. And without that active ticket, you might not recognize that it's there. So I went out and got examples from a lot of the different operators, okay, from around the state. The government doesn't require any shape or size of us to have, and so you'll see all sorts of different sizes. Now, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes you'll just see a little curb button or marker even just on the curb when you get in the residential area. I've also brought an example of what one of these might look like, because I like show and tells. And I apologize for those in the back who might not see it, but every one of these markers will show you three things, okay? Like if you look up here on the screen, the first thing you see is petroleum pipeline. The one I'm holding up right by my fingers, it says gas, for those of you who can read that, okay? The next thing it'll tell you is a number to call if you have any questions or if there's an emergency, okay? Right in the middle of this one that I'm holding up, okay? And last but not least, you can see it says up on the screen, Endeavor. That's the operator's name. This one, for instance, says right here, Dominion Energy, Utah, Wyoming, and Idaho, okay? So these come on all shapes and sizes, and we are required by the government to put these as of line of sight, so you can always see the next one. We're also required at every road crossing to put one, okay? And we're also required at every railroad crossing to put one. And if we follow a road right-of-way, it might not, a lot of these times these markers don't sit right directly over the line, but they'll be offset if we end up running down a road, because it'd be impossible to put it on a hard surface. Okay, so I want to talk just briefly about if you come across one of these and you're working near a right-of-way, I want to talk about some signs of maybe what a leak might look like. Now, in both cases of either of these lines, whether I'm talking a liquids or a natural gas line, it's not going to cause vegetation to grow. It'll kill vegetation, okay? The other thing you might notice is if it's a liquids line, if it's highly volatile liquid, when it's running in the pipeline, it's at a higher pressure, and so it's in a liquid state. And if there's a small hole in it or a hole gets in it, when it comes out to atmospheric pressure, which is lower, it'll change state and become a vapor cloud. And often these are heavier than air and will stay close to the ground. Now, if it's a petroleum line, whether it's a refined product or crude, you hit it, more of a familiar smell or a black color might come out, and you'll recognize some pooling. If you cross a water body and you're seeing sheens on the water that are unexplained, or some of this color, I think that's a pretty obvious sign that you might have a leak, okay? You might hear a hissing noise. Now let's talk about natural gas for a minute. Natural gas transmission lines, so the majority of these in the States are unodorized. Methane primarily makes up natural gas. It doesn't have an odor. It's only when we put it into our distribution systems at like a city gate station where they put that mercaptan in it, okay? And that mercaptan can be sucked out. It can be filtered out if you have a leak underground. So my first tip is going to be to you, if you ever are excavating, okay, and you hit a line, do not put your bucket on top of it, okay? Natural gas is lighter than air, it wants to go up. You hit the line, you want that product to go up, because the problem is if you put your bucket back on it, it'll find the path of least resistance, and that path of least resistance might be a sewer line, it might be a storm drain, and it gets into one of those through a joint or something, it's going to travel a lot quicker through that than it would through the soil. And when it's traveling through the soil to get to that utility, it could even be a dry utility that's in a conduit. When we were up in Logan, I was talking to the folks up there. They had a leak they were trying to find, and they had it spread out on 4 blocks because it got in a dry conduit and ran. And they had a difficulty finding where the leak was. But it also can take that mercaptan out, okay, as it runs through the ground. Natural gas also, if you hit it, or it crosses a water body, I guess, it can bubble up. But using your sense of smell is not always a sure sign for that. Okay, so this is a good bad example. And this happened last year out in Pennsylvania. And the NTSB report has not been published, but we do know some information about this. 1 person died and 5 others were injured. One of the people who were injured was from the local utility company who came to respond to it. The contractors, some of the good things they did is they had an active ticket and there were marks present on the ground. And what I suspect what happened here, because I end up responding to far too many of these emergencies in my area, is I think it was what happened to this piece of pipe, okay? For those of you who can't quite tell what I'm holding up a 2-inch steel pipe, okay? And there is a auger or a drill head that has gotten into it, okay? I think what happened here is the drilling contractor failed to follow an industry best practice of when they decided to choose their running line for a bore path, they failed to pothole or daylight every utility. And what I mean by that is excavating each utility, maybe by using a vac truck, and most of these bore companies have something like that to suck up their mud, and locate, positively identify the exact XY location and also the depth of each utility, and to keep it open while their drill head is going through. I responded to one of these where that didn't happen, and I would say the contractor was boring blind because he couldn't see where he was going. He hit our gas line 70 times because he was right on top of us. It put so much gas in the ground that it took us 3 days to suck it out. And it was extremely costly because we kicked people out of homes and we kicked people out of restaurants. And all that lost revenue for those restaurants had to come back. And it was the worst case scenario because, like we were talking earlier, when you're boring underneath the ground and you hit a gas line, that gas will find a way out. If it gets up in a sewer line or something, then it gets a lot worse. And that kind of leads me to my next thing I want to talk about. This didn't happen last year. This actually happened back in 2018. This was out in Texas. And I think we can learn some really good things from this, okay? What happened was 23 years prior to 2018, someone was doing a sewer line replacement. And I can't recall if it's the main or the lateral, but they were out there doing a pipe replacement. And there's 2 things that it pointed out of the NTSB report, okay? One, the gas line was nicked, okay? And anytime you nick a line, whether it's steel or plastic, or even if it's the coating, you create a stress concentrator on that pipe. And over time, that will weaken the pipe, especially as it cycles through, normal fluctuations in pressure in the line, okay? And eventually you can get a crack at that weak point. If it's plastic, you've all played with plastic and bent it back and forth, or a paper clip. It's the same kind of thing. You create a weak point, and eventually to create a crack there, okay? The other thing was it also pointed out that good compaction wasn't done, essentially. I guess I could have worded that better. It must have been a Friday, I'm assuming, and the crew wanted to get home, so they took their spoil pile when they were done with their project and just pushed it back into the hole and just compacted the surface of it, okay? And I respond to a lot of these like this also, where someone, when you cross another utility, over time, if you do that and you don't compact in good, like, let's say 12-inch lifts, put in about 18 inches of soil, compact it down nice and tight, and do the same thing again, you'll cause all those other utilities eventually, as the ground settles, to settle along with the ground. And it will pull fittings apart, and it'll pull plastic lines apart. And so what I would suggest was something like this. If you ever nick a line, because that happens, you put a scratch in it, even if it's the coating, and you don't think it's a big deal, like, get the monkey off your back and call the operator and put all the liability back on them, okay? Because no one wants anything associated with their name to go to something like this. Okay. last thing I wanted to talk about. So if you do hit a line, okay, we already talked a little bit about that, but if you hit a line, obviously the first thing, and you have a product coming out, no matter what pipeline it is, get your crews to a safe location. If there's other people in the immediate area, help them stand back, okay? Call 911 and then look around for one of these pipeline markers and call the operator so we can respond as quickly as we can.